Hello and welcome to round 11 here at Grand Prix Oakland. Murray Bertholdi and Reed Duke in the booth with you here. Feature match area, Byrne versus Is It Phoenix? Johnny Daniel on Byrne and Ely Cassis on Is It Phoenix? So what do you make of this matchup, Reed?
I think it's going to be a really close matchup. I think both decks have a lot of game and their strategy can work. So the advantage of the Byrne player is that the cards are very redundant and the goal is very clear. You're just trying to deal 20 damage to your opponent. The advantage of the Is It Phoenix deck is that it has single creatures that both demand an answer and are difficult for the Byrne player to answer. So Thing in the Ice having 4 toughness, that's usually going to demand 2 Burn spells. You can't really ignore that card because a 7/8 attacker is going to kill you pretty quickly. So I think this is a matchup that either player can win, and it's going to become perhaps even more interesting after sideboarding.
We've got a suspended Rift Bolt on the Byrne player's side of the battlefield. Metamorphose here from Is It Phoenix, netting a blue and a red mana for Ely Cassis.
Ooh, Johnny Daniel is packing heat. He just has 5 Burn spells, I think.
Oh, really? Nice.
2
One mountain.
2 lands and 6 Burn spells, I think, were his top 8 cards. Or perhaps he took a mulligan, so 5 Burn spells would be a bit different.
Faithless Looting here for Cassis. And you can see how this Is It Phoenix deck, especially in Modern, is able to just churn through its cards.
Yeah, so any number of Arclight Phoenixes that Cassis discards here will be returning to the battlefield right away with haste. So you can imagine if he had 2, this would just be a completely unfair draw. Attacking for 6 on the second turn while smoothing your draws, making your land drops, not really costing you any cards to achieve that. It's just amazing. And a lot of times you will see the power of this deck scale based on how many Arclight Phoenixes appear in the top 15 or 16 cards.
Okay, well, it looks like we're going to be able to discard at least 1 Phoenix here, which is coming back, swinging into the red zone here to hit Johnny Daniel for 3 points of damage. So pretty impressive. We didn't get 2, but 1 felt pretty good there just as it stands. So the Rift Bolt is going straight upstairs from Daniel.
So this is going well for both players. This is exactly what Daniel wanted. And one thing that I want to point out, one subtlety, is it could wind up being very important that he had Inspiring Vantage in his hand instead of, say, having to fetch and shock for a Sacred Foundry. Getting to have the painless white mana in a matchup that shapes up to be a close race could be a big deal.
Thing in the Ice here for Cassis. Critical 4 toughness, as you mentioned. And once that thing flips over, what can Byrne do?
You got to go straight for the opponent at that point.
Yeah.
I think Daniel has a 1, maybe 2 turn window to kill the 0/4 creature if he would like to go for that strategy. But otherwise, I think he just wants to try to race and kill Ely before the Thing in the Ice can kill him.
Let's see what he chooses to do here with his Byrne spells this turn.
Well, Lava Spike makes it easy because there's only one thing you can do with that.
And another suspended Rift Bolt. Ely Cassis drops down to 8. So pressure on here from the Byrne player. We're going to go to 7 here, cracking our fetch.
So that's very relevant here because, as I mentioned, Daniel's hand was basically just 5 3-point Byrne spells. So that's 15 damage, getting Ely down to 5. That's a pretty inconvenient number for the Byrne player because there's no single card in the deck that deals 5 damage. So if Daniel is holding a land here, that means he needs 2 more Byrne spells off the top of his library. But Ely fetching down to 4 means he could open himself to getting lucky and just finding Boros Charm.
Turn back over to Ely Cassis.
So what we might see here is Ely play Crackling Drake, just cross his fingers that he doesn't die this turn because that will set him up for potentially an enormous hit if he can chain together enough instants and sorceries. Say 4 instants and sorceries, enough to transform Awoken Horror, return Arclight Phoenix, although I guess the downside of that play would be Awoken Horror bouncing the Crackling Drake, so this probably makes a lot more sense.
Cassis plays out the second Thing in the Ice, a couple of mana available. Johnny Daniel just plays a land.
So Ely holding Lightning Bolt and he's considering here, do I want the ability to return Arclight Phoenix if I can find 3 spells in the same turn, or
Sure.
do I care more about using my mana effectively? I think given that he had Izzet Charm as well, this makes perfect sense.
All right, so those things in the ice are going to tick down to 3 ice counters. Ely falls down to 1.
That's 3 spells.
There's 3 spells.
2 of them lightning bolts. Wow. Well, Burn lends itself to games like this. This was as close as it gets.
That was
One
wild.
thing different, basically, on either side, and the outcome would have been different, but that is game number 1 going to Ely Cassis.
Incredible. 3 spells in hand. Flip both my things in the ice, which are on 3. Bring back my Arclight Phoenix. Boom, you're dead.
Yeah. And I like to see Johnny Daniel having fun there.
Yeah.
You know he had some similar games yesterday that ended up going in his favor, so he can be a good sport and say, you know what, I was 1 point short, and you drew the lightning bolt, so that's that.
Yeah, normally that's that's Burn that's got those great top decks. All right, Ely Cassis up a game here. Record 9-0-1. Johnny Daniel undefeated. 10-0 coming in here to round 11, day 2 of Grand Prix Oakland.
And I believe, Maria, he's actually our last perfect record player.
Okay.
Because Sam Black and Matt Nass both taking a loss the first round of day 2 here, dropping to 9-1. Johnny Daniel sitting alone at the top of the standings. But Ely Cassis looking to overtake him if he can win 1 more of the last 2 sideboarded games.
How do you like Burn coming into the tournament this weekend, Reed?
I'm glad you asked that. I'm actually a huge fan of the Burn deck, a longtime fan of this deck. It's been around forever, and it's consistently put up pretty good results. I think Burn is the type of deck that tends to get a bad rap.
Yes.
People say, like, oh, it's a budget deck, oh, it's really easy, there's no skill to it. But the fact is, it is just a really good deck, and it's not true that there's no skill to
Absolutely
it. Making
not.
the subtle decisions like timing your burn spells, using your fetch lands correctly, making your mulligan decisions, these things matter a lot, how you sideboard. And I think a player that's actually takes burn seriously and brings it, with a well-practiced and a pilot and a well-tuned list, I think it's as good a deck as anything else in Modern.
Do you think Burn suffers from kind of going up and down based on the metagame around it because it can be, you can bring in cards that deal with it rather effectively?
Good question. Yeah, Burn is similar to, say, Dredge or Affinity or Tron, these decks that are very linear. They do one thing, and if you want to target them with sideboard cards, you can do it. The nice thing about Burn is that there's not that much overlap with the cards that target Burn. So, for example, if I'm playing a Modern tournament, I could put Ancient Grudge in my sideboard, and I get to use that against Affinity, I get to use it against Hardened Scales, Karkland Ironworks, Lantern Control, a wide variety of decks. If I put a Timely Reinforcements or a Core Firewalker in my sideboard, that's pretty much just for one matchup. And Burn, for the past handful of years, has occupied a space in the metagame where it's enough of a niche deck that most players are not making that decision to bring, 3 or 4 targeted sideboard cards. So it's in a pretty nice place in Modern, in my opinion.
Awesome stuff. Players drawing their opening hands for game number 2. Ely Cassis currently 1 up over Johnny Daniel. Playing Izzet Phoenix versus Burn, and we mentioned that Johnny, our lone undefeated player, we believe, left in the room. We talked about Matt Nass and Sam Black also entering day 2 here undefeated, but they lost last round, both of them on Karkland Ironworks. Both players happy with their opening hands, and we are off to the races with the Rift Bolt. Just a land tap for Ely Cassis, Bolchu.
Now, just a land tapped, but that doesn't necessarily indicate to me that Ely had nothing to cast on his turn. It indicates to me that he really doesn't want to deal 2 damage to himself with that Steam Vents.
Okay.
So if he's thinking, this has to come into play tapped sooner or later, I might as well just play it now instead of using a cantrip on the first turn or holding up a lightning bolt when it seems Daniel doesn't have a haste creature in hand. I think prioritizing getting your Shocklands into play tapped is a really important technique when you're facing the burn deck.
It's really important to think about those things at the very least. We're going to get an island here for Cassis. And Eidolon of the Great Revel into play for Johnny Daniel, which seems like it could be a bit of a problem for Cassis if he can't get rid of it.
Now, look, I like how Johnny Daniel's posture in the chair has changed once he put Eidolon of the Great Revel into play. He literally has his trigger finger ready to go.
Yeah. I like that.
All right, great play here. These Searing Blazes and Searing Bloods are Burn's form of card advantage. You normally, if you find yourself playing Burn and making the choice between burning the player or the creature, it's usually a sign that you're facing a pretty bad situation, because Burn, as we saw in Game 1, it usually has enough firepower to just barely get past the finish line in terms of dealing 20 damage. So if you have to burn some creatures, things can go badly for you. However, with Searing Blood and Searing Blaze, you get to have your cake and eat it too. You get to tempo your opponent, you get to get card advantage by dealing damage to them and killing off their creature, and you just get to progress your game plan while stymieing the opponents. Those cards are huge in creature matchups, part of the reason that Burn is such an effective deck.
Eidolon of the Great Revel falls to a lightning bolt from Cassis, so he was able to deal with it, but not before he fell down to 9 life.
And this is an example. Johnny Daniel has cast 3 spells in this game, and they've all traded, and you find Ely Cassis at 9 life. Yeah, the Eidolon dealing 4 damage, the Searing Blood incidentally chipping away for 3 after trading with Thing in the Ice. He's just had all the right cards, and these cards make it really difficult on the Izzet Phoenix player unless Ely is packing some very dedicated sideboard cards. I think he's going to be in trouble this game.
Island coming into play here for Cassis drops him down to 8. Sleight of hand taking a look. Back over to Johnny Daniel. Third land hits the table here. And just says go.
That's interesting to me. I would have thought he would deploy maybe another Eidolon of the Great Revel. Looks like he doesn't have it, though. I just missaw. But he could have made the decision, which he did in the first game, of firing off some burn spells while Cassis is tapped out. But I think because he has Searing Blaze in his hand, he wants to keep his options open in case Cassis does play a haste creature or return some Arclight Phoenixes from the graveyard. Whoa.
Blood Moon here from Ely Cassis. Respond with the Lightning Helix here. Cassis will fall down to 5.
And this is a really funny thing, Maria,
Yeah,
is
what?
players boarding in Blood Moon against an effectively mono-red deck.
Yeah. I mean, why do we do this? Just to keep him off of Helix?
I really like Johnny Daniel's decision to not sacrifice his Arid Mesa. If it's going to be a mountain either way, might as well just save yourself the 1 life.
Yep. Ely down to 2 here after a bolt. Just going to cast Metamorphose here.
To speak to the Blood Moon a little bit more, the one thing you can count on is that Burn is not going to have a basic Plains, at least not in the main deck, because of having to cast 2 red spells on turn 2, because of Searing Blaze, Searing Blood, Eidolon of the Great Revel. They really can't afford any land that doesn't produce red mana. So if you can successfully cut them off of Boros Charm, Lightning Helix, and any other white sideboard cards for the rest of the game, that could be well worth it. And along the lines of the turn 1 Steam Vents here and the Scalding Tarns cracking for basic islands, you sort of know that going for islands is part of your plan against Burn, because that way you save yourself precious points of life anyway.
Right.
So while this is a little bit goofy and it's not a backbreaker, it does make sense to me that Cassis would board it in.
Okay. Cassis at just 2 life here is fighting the good fight.
But look at this, Maria. He may actually do himself in with this explosive turn, returning Arclight Phoenix, because Johnny Daniel's last cards in hand, they're Searing Blazes.
Absolutely. And in comes Arclight Phoenix for 3. knocking Daniel down to 16. And there's Thing in the Ice.
Yep, so
Yeah. Yeah.
Daniel giving Cassis the same courtesy that he was afforded in game 1, just revealing the hand, showing, you know what, you're dead on my turn, that's that.
Johnny Daniel evens things up here in round 11, one game apiece. Burn versus Is It Phoenix? Nice to see the players having a good time down there in the feature match area. I always think Modern lends itself to players just having a good time playing each other more than usual, as everybody kind of has their deck that they love to play and identify with. And you can ask people about their deck and why they love it and that kind of thing. I think it's really nice.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the camaraderie in Modern and all of these older formats is sometimes a bit more than in Standard or Limited.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about some of the changes that Ely Cassis might be making, and what do you think Johnny Daniel's doing to better his chances against Is It Phoenix?
Well, actually, this is something I was thinking about when I saw that Blood Moon, is if I'm Johnny Daniel, I'm looking to a lot of my white sideboard cards for this matchup. Now, Path to Exile is a great example because of the importance of Thing in the Ice
Sure.
and the inability of the 3-damage burn spells to kill it. So Path to Exile is one that, if I have it in my sideboard, it's coming right in. Rest in Peace is one that I'm going to be strongly considering as well, because that's going to permanently shut off Arclight Phoenix and Faithless Looting and any of a variety of cards that Ely may or may not have, stuff like Snapcaster Mage. So those are cards that I'm thinking about, although they're not. Rest in Peace is not a slam dunk. I see now, taking a look at Johnny Daniel's deck, that he has 4. I'm not boarding in all 4, but 0, 1, or 2 I think would all be reasonable options for the matchup. Maybe after seeing the Blood Moon I would reconsider. But actually, Johnny Daniel's sideboard here, very simple and elegant. 4-4-4-3.
I like it.
Only 4 different options available to him, but one of those 4 ofs is Searing Blood, which we did see him play in game number 2, well prepared for Arclight Phoenix, predicting well that pattern that might come up of Thing in the Ice blocking a 2-power creature. So props to Johnny Daniel of identifying that subtlety, that play pattern that can come up.
And we talked about this a little bit yesterday about kind of the peril of sideboarding too heavily when your deck is extremely linear. But even in his sideboard cards, Johnny Daniel maintains his game plan a lot of the time.
Great, well said, great point. Yeah, there's 4 Rest in Peace, and every other sideboard card is a burn spell. Every other card plays that sort of Searing Blaze, Searing Blood role of, I'm going to kill one of your things and deal you damage. I don't want to do anything besides point burn spells at my opponent's face. That's the plan that's been working for me throughout the tournament, and I'm going to stick to that. I love it.
Just generally in Modern, Reed, how much do you tweak your sideboard before tournaments?
Well, a lot, but it does depend on the archetype that you're playing. The decks that I like to choose often, stuff like Jund and Abzan, those decks you can sideboard a lot because the game plan is not linear. It's more just about having individually good cards that match up well against your opponent. So I can make a swap, like I'm going to take out my Thought Seizes and bring in cheap removal if I'm playing against a creature deck, or I'm going to take out my cheap removal and bring in more dense threats if I'm playing against a control deck, things like that. So I can sideboard a lot with those decks. But if I was piloting Burn or Affinity or Tron, one of these really linear strategies, I would probably sideboard a lot less.
Sure. Okay, we're getting ready here for game number 3, all tied up. Ely got the first one, Johnny got the second one. Here in round 11, both players technically undefeated.
Oh boy, and I see 2 Arclight Phoenixes in Cassis's hand.
Yes.
We did talk about how this deck can be dramatically more powerful if it's able to find multiple Phoenixes early in the game. However, there's still one step from those coming back onto the battlefield, which is that Cassis needs to discard them.
All right, we'll see how quickly those Phoenixes can return to play here in the hands of Ely Cassis. Some explosive stuff potentially coming up from him. Johnny Daniel here finding a mountain. Classic burn. Gotta say, I do love his card sleeves. This is my favorite color. Thumbs up. Step 1, Lava Spike. Cassis here cracking a fetch land. Interested to see what he goes for. He's going to get his Steam Vents.
Notably, Johnny Daniel has not had that turn 1 creature in any of the 3 games. Sometimes, particularly when the burn player's on the play, it's the turn 1 Goblin Guide that really strikes fear into the opponent's heart, because it's one thing to put together 6 or 7 burn spells to deal 20 damage. It's quite another if you play a turn 1 Goblin Guide that gets in 6 points incidentally. That makes it a lot easier on you. So you often see players sort of under the gun panicking against a turn 1 creature from the burn deck, like, oh, I'm going to fetch and shock myself just so I can lightning bolt your Goblin Guide. So now it's effectively dealt me 5 damage and traded 1 for 1. But Johnny hasn't had those.
No.
He has had the Eidolons, which have been pretty good so far.
Oh, yes. Eidolon, kind of a must-kill situation a little bit for the Izzet Phoenix player if they want to implement their game plan the way that they drew it up. But interesting here, Cassis last turn gets his Thing in the Ice out, so we could be seeing some fireworks coming up.
Wow. It's a lot of burn in his hand.
Oh, no! Rest in peace from Johnny Daniel. Never mind.
Yeah, no Arclight Phoenixes coming back. However, Thing in the Ice remains a big threat. Arclight Phoenix can still be hardcast a turn from now, and Crackling Drake unaffected by Rest in Peace. So not a disaster for Cassis.
Thing in the Ice is going to tick down here. There's a look at Rest in Peace. We've exiled all cards from graveyards. If a card or token would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So Cassis unable to bring back discarded Arclight Phoenixes because they head straight into the exile zone.
Yeah, if you looked in the dictionary under sideboard card, you'd see a picture of Rest in Peace. This is just quintessential hate card for strategies using the graveyard. It's one of the cleanest, most effective answers to just wiping up a deck like Dredge or Hollow One, whatever it might be.
Thought Scour here takes down Thing in the Ice to 2, and he's going to target Johnny Daniel with that, which I think is pretty funny.
Yeah, that's a nice techie play when Rest in Peace is out. That it doesn't really matter, but since you're not filling your own graveyard,
might as well
just eliminate cards from the opponent's library instead of your own. It's very unlikely to matter either way, but that's what players usually choose to do when Rest in Peace is out there.
Lightning Bolt hits Daniel down to 13, and Gut Shot here, cast for quote-unquote free, is going to awaken the horror, and Johnny Daniel just extends the hand. So that is our match. Going to Eli Cassis here in round 11. The Izzet Phoenix deck taking down the Burn deck. You know, sometimes you just have to scoop to a Kraken.
Yeah, absolutely. The raw strength of that Thing in the Ice is part of the reason the Izzet Phoenix deck is so effective. And the combination of just being a 1-card army against opposing creature decks, completely decimating something like humans all on its own, the combination of that quality plus 4 toughness, allowing it to dodge so many of the removal spells in Modern, is what allows this Izzet Phoenix deck to really excel. And you could see Johnny Daniel conceded the game with a hand full of cards that dealt 3 damage. So if that 1 point of toughness was different on Thing in the Ice, the entire matchup would be like night and day. But
Izzet Phoenix, the new hotness too, Reed. Oh, Eli Cassis posing for a picture. Looking good, my man. But I want to know, how good do you think this Izzet Phoenix deck is? Can it last the test of time?
Yeah, I think it can. This is an example of the type of deck that stands the test of time, because it's not a single-minded, one-dimensional deck like Burn is. You know, if Burn was ever the best deck in Modern, I'd just be coming with Core Firewalkers. Boom, easy solution. There's not really a card like that for Izzet Phoenix. Here we saw Johnny Daniel had Rest in Peace, great sideboard card, didn't stop Eli. there's not really one card I can turn to or put in my sideboard to improve my matchup against this deck. You really have to start from restructuring, choosing a new archetype, and fighting it at every stage, which is something that a lot of times players just can't do.
Great point. And, I'm all on the is it train, being Niv Mizzet and all. Anyway, we've got more Magic coming up for you in just a minute. Don't go anywhere.